Hi, welcome back to another video. Summer is coming to an end and it's a great moment to repot your plants, which is what I've been doing for the past couple of weeks. But here comes a question that actually one of my viewers asked me, which is, how do you know when a plant needs to be repotted? Experienced gardener can tell just by looking at the plant and by taking into consideration a few factors, but indeed it can be tricky for a beginner gardener to know when your plant needs to be repotted. So today let's talk about a few signs that the plant can send to let you know that it needs a bigger pot, and also a few things that you can do to check if a plant needs to be repotted. As a rule of thumb, you should repot your plants every 2-3 years. Even if your plant doesn't need a larger container, it's still a good habit to pot it into a fresh soil. So to take it out of its old pot, shake off the old soil and plant it in a fresh potting mix, because potting mix and garden soil are not the same. Potting mix loses its structure quickly, it tends to compact very easily, and of course it's losing nutrients, it's leaching out nutrients rapidly, so it's always a good idea to repot your plants every 2-3 years. So that's the first indication. If your plant has been growing in the same pot for more than 3 years, it will be a good idea to repot it, and then at the time of repotting, when you take your plant out of the pot and you see that the roots started to turn around the pot, started to be a bit compacted, then it is a sign that you should repot your plant into a bit larger container. The other way that you can tell that a plant needs repotting is just by looking at your plant. For example, I have a perfect example here, which is my houseplant Ficus elastica. As you can see, the container is ridiculously small compared to the top growth, and that's the exact same thing that happened with my two tuyas, my two evergreens. The top growth was just so heavy and the pot was so small that whenever there was a wind, the wind would knock the plant on the floor, and eventually the container broke. So if you look at your plant and you see that the container is just really small compared to the size of the plant, it's also a good idea to repot your plant just to provide it with more stability, especially if it is a plant that is grown outside. Third thing that you can do to check if your plant needs repotting, of course you won't be able to do it with larger plants like shrubs and trees, but if it is a small plant, what you can do, you can gently tease the plant out of the pot, and if it comes out like this one, as you can see, if the root ball holds in one piece and there is no soil left in the container, that's a sign that your plant needs repotting, because the roots, as you can see at the bottom, started to turn around the pot and started to become slightly root bound. So it's a good moment to give the plant a little bit larger container. Also, another way that you can tell, you can gently tip your plant and check if there are any roots coming out of the bottom. In this case, the roots are not coming out of the bottom, out of the drainage hole, because they kept turning around themselves. But in some cases you can see roots coming out through the drainage hole, and that's also a good indicator that your plant needs a larger container. Please don't just go outside on your balcony and remove every single plant from the pot just to check. It's only if you are suspecting that the plant needs to be repotted and that the plant could be potentially root bound. Okay, yet another way that you can tell that your plant needs a larger container is when you water your plants. And here we are going to make a little experiment. I'm going to show you a plant that needs to be repotted versus plant that is grown in appropriate size of container. Of course, it will depend on the potting soil that you have and all that. Here I have yet another houseplant. As you can tell, I'm neglecting my houseplants. But this plant, Tradescantia zebrina, definitely needs a larger container, because each time I water this plant, the water is just passing through the pot like super rapidly. It doesn't even stay in the pot at all. And that's also a sign that the plant is pot bound. When there's no soil left and there are only roots in the pot, there's nothing that can catch that moisture, to catch that water, to hold that water in the container, so the water is just passing through. And of course, as I mentioned, if you have very free draining potting mix, for example with cacti and succulents, this can happen as well. But if you are growing any other plant and you know that the potting soil used to hold the moisture and now it's not anymore, that's a sign that the plant probably became pot bound and there's just too many roots and not enough soil in the container to hold moisture. And I'm going to show you, as I mentioned, I'm going to water this plant right now to show you what exactly I mean. Check this out, I hope that you can see it. I'm going to water my chives. See, the water just is slowly absorbed by soil. And that's what you should expect when you water your plants, the soil to slowly absorb and then the excess to come out by the drainage hole. So everything is fine. Now the same experiment with Tradescantia zebrina. I'm gonna turn it your direction so that you can see. You see? It took literally a few seconds for the water to pass. So that's a sign that there's not enough soil in that pot and too many roots. So this is the next candidate for repotting. Okay, so now let's talk about a few signs that a plant can send or plant can show to let you know that it needs repotting. And these will be usually in the case of larger trees or larger shrubs, when you are unable to just take the plant out of its pot because, for example, the plant is too large, the pot is too heavy, you can't tip it over, you can't inspect the roots because it's just physically not possible. But yet again here, as we said, if a plant has been growing in the same pot for 2-3 years, that's the best indication that it needs repotting. But some plants grow so rapidly, and let's say initially you planted it in too small of a container. After a year or two, it can already start to show signs that it's stressed, that it needs a larger container. So here are some of these signs. First, if the growth of your plant is stunted, so if your plant has been developing nicely, it has been growing healthy up to some point and then it stopped, and for months you don't see any changes, you don't see any improvement, and the plant is just sitting there and doing nothing, that could be a sign that the plant simply needs a larger container. But of course it can also mean many other things. It can mean that, for example, you have not been fertilizing your plant doesn't have enough nutrients to grow. Second thing is yellowing or dropping of the leaves, but here again it can mean 100 different things. But if you take in consideration, for example, yellowing leaf, stunted growth, plant that has been grown in the same pot for several years, maybe you start to see some roots coming out of the drainage hole. If you add several of those things together, that just gives you a bigger image. Okay, and now just a few words about the size of the container when you repot your plants. I'm not gonna talk about what to do with a plant that needs a larger container but you can't repot it to a larger container because, for example, you don't have enough space. I will keep it for a next video, for another video, because that's like a really large topic on its own and I wouldn't have enough time to talk about everything in one video. But for today, let's talk about choosing containers. So when you repot your plant, how much bigger container you should choose. And people often ask about precise dimensions. They, for example, I often get asked, like, in what size of container you grow this or this plant. And I know it can be a bit frustrating, but I really never pay attention to that. I judge everything by eye because it is really not important if you grow your plant in a 16-liter container or 18-liter container. It really doesn't matter, though, so don't stress about this. Even if you make a mistake, let's say, I mean mistake because there are not really mistakes. If you pot it in too small of a container, it just means that you will need to water it more often, and the next time you repot it will be maybe in 1 year or in 2 years instead of 3 years. But it's all a learning curve, so don't stress about it. Even if you choose too small container, you will just need to repot it in a bit shorter time. And if you choose too large container, the bigger the container, the more soil you will need to use, and the more soil you have, the more moisture it will hold. So if you have a very small plant and you plant it in a very large container, there is of course a risk that the plant will rot just because there's a lot of wet soil around it and the roots are not large enough to take up that moisture. But yet again, it's not a big deal. I potted my clematis at the beginning of this summer. My clematis was in pot like this. Very skinny, very tiny container, and I potted it into the largest container I have on my balcony. The thing is humongous. I will show you, it's in the back. So I planted a very tiny plant in a humongous container and it's thriving. It can work as well, even if you plant a small plant into a large container. So as I said, it's all just question of learning and experimenting, and even if you fail, that's okay, that happens and it's not a big deal. But generally, just to give you an idea, if you repot some plant, you would normally choose a container that is 2 sizes larger. If the pot is 3-4 centimeters wider, than in diameter than your current pot, that's fine. Okay guys, so I hope that you found this video helpful, that it gave you a better idea on when you need to repot your plants. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye!